gentlemen. Welcome back to the Exceptional Conservative Show, live from the nation's capital. I'm your host, the Exceptional One, Ken McClinton. We have with us tonight a tremendous guest and a tremendous writer in his own right, from his years with Town Hall and a number in the Washington Examiner. You found his writings in many that you read today. Ryan James Girdusky is with us tonight. He has a tremendous new book out called "They're Not Listening: How the Elites Have Created the National Populist Revolution." It's a tremendous honor and pleasure to have him here tonight. You write this book at a time where America is literally at a divide, a cultural divide, and I sincerely ask you here, is that divide the responsibility of President Donald Trump, or were there seeds of this discontent planted many decades ago?
Oh, I mean, no, I think that Trump is a reaction to the divide. And in the book, They're Not Listening: How the Elites Created the National Populist Revolution, we show that that was happening for decades. The people who hate Trump the most are the most responsible for his presidency. So take an issue like immigration, which is a large issue from the book. In the 90s, former President Bill Clinton asked former Congresswoman Barbara Jordan to figure out a plan of how the Black Americans were hurting the most because of the economy, how to improve their lives. And she said the number one thing you could do is reduce legal immigration. And she put forward a bill to reduce legal immigration. And Bill Clinton supported the bill. But what happened was both people on the Republican side of the aisle, most of the Republican side of the aisle at the time, and the Democrats worked to sabotage it and destroy it. Had she been able to reduce legal immigration 25 years ago, there's a very good chance Donald Trump would have never become president, because the issue wouldn't be as divisive as it is today, because we would have accepted a fewer immigrants, they would have assimilated faster, and people would have felt less threatened by mass immigration. So that's a perfect issue of one. If you want to talk about like racial politics, which is heated up now since the killing of George Floyd, since the mid 2000s, the rate, and this we describe this in the book, and we outline this in the book, the rate of woke terminology in our general media has increased substantially. So around the year 2010, for whatever reason in that year, outlets like the Washington Post and the New York Times started radically increasing the number of times they used words like whiteness, fragility, woke terminology like that, bias, those kinds of words. And since then, the number of Black Americans who feel like they are treated less than white Americans is higher now, according to a recent study, is higher now than it was before the Civil Rights Act was signed. Now that flies in the face of data and of learned experience, where we are as a country. Certainly less intolerance than there was in the 1960s. There's less bias, there's less bigotry. And really what we want as a country, a number of Black Americans incarcerated is down 30% in 30 years. The shooting and killing of unarmed Black men is down 80% in 5 years. The graduation rate has dropped. The unwed teen pregnancy rate has dropped. Everything is going in a very good direction, but you would never know that by just simply listening to mainstream news outlets that really push a very woke white liberal agenda. That all happened well before Donald Trump came down a golden escalator.
Exactly.
And his presidency is because those things never happen, because the elites push that opinion and those ideas.
Now, I want to interject here, because a lot of my conservative brethren would retort, listen, we've had a Black president. Isn't that a sign that we're going in the right direction? Is that enough of an answer in retort to the violent use of literary work on behalf of the left, in terms of pursuing a specific interest that's not necessarily one based on race, but one based on an economic outcome?
Well, that's a great point. That's what I point out in the book. a lot of the problems within the black community is an issue of poverty. It's not an issue of race. If
Thank
you
you.
are born black in the Mississippi Delta, or if you're born white in Appalachia, like West Virginia and Kentucky, or if you're born Native American in South Dakota, you're going to die 20 years before someone born in the outskirts of Denver, Colorado, simply because you are poor and you're in poverty. In the 1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. started a campaign against poverty in Mississippi.
Yeah.
That town that he started his campaign in is still one of the poorest towns in the United States of America. Nothing really changed. Our problem with our politics right now, and it's larger than Donald Trump, and it's not even just America, this is a global problem. If you look at the makeup of the legislatures of this country, only 10% of city councilmen nationwide have spent a majority of their life as members of the working class. That number drops to 4% when you look at state legislatures and 2% when you look at Congress. They are just simply divorced. More than any other representation or misrepresentation in society, women, non-white, non-Christian, whatever have you, the most disproportionately represented group of people are working class people. They just do not have representation at all when it comes to how our laws are made, and that is extremely problematic.
Now, when you say representation, because a lot of people get offended with that, listen, we vote, we find the right people to put in office, and they do their very best day in and day out. When you say representation, what exactly is the working class? What exactly is the individual who is making small business investment on Main Street looking for in someone going to Washington D.C.?
Well, let's just take what is the working class. I mean, you can break it up into certain different things: how much money you make, whether you have a college education, and what zip code you live in. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
certainly three areas where you could be a very wealthy businessman in suburban Indiana or exurban Indiana and make $95,000 a year, which would be a very good living. But you are a member of the working class.
Yeah.
Certainly, you would not be, and you could also, by the way, be a fireman who makes $100,000 a year in Brooklyn, New York, and you're a member of the working class. It doesn't really have a sense of where you are, or what exact money you make. Is where you fall on the economic ladder and the educational ladder of where you live. But they do not have a social group that sits there and fights and advocates for them on any by means of any race. It is a class issue that they just do not have any representation whatsoever. So when we talk about things like repatriating supply chains from China, which is the issue of the moment, especially with the coronavirus,
Yes.
it's a very important issue. It's something that I support tremendously and I advocate for and have for some time. The problem is when we bring those factories and those supply chains back to the United States, where are they going to go? They're going to go to probably Texas, Arizona, Nevada, and California, which is where most manufacturing, or a large number of manufacturing, has gone since Trump has become president. Why? Because they have the best and newest infrastructure. I have been to places like Akron, Ohio, and certain parts of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and Southern Illinois, and you would think we have lost the war.
Yeah.
That's how dilapidated the infrastructure is. If we were just to do an infrastructure bill in the Midwest, it probably would create over 1 million manufacturing jobs. But they are forgotten, those people, the working class people, when it comes to a subject of just what we're doing with the coronavirus right now. What the Congress is in there and pushing, which is the $600 unemployment benefit, is very bad for business, because if you're working $13 an hour, $12 an hour, you wouldn't need you would be more inclined to not work because your unemployment benefits would be so high. What they should have done from the very beginning is given everyone like a $3,000-$4,000 check for families, depending on how large the family is and what their income was. Given them a check, a stimulus check, and kept the regular unemployment rate. That way, obviously, if their company is shut down, they would receive some funds for it. However, they would not be inclined not to go back to work once those businesses started. I've spoken to many businessmen, and they cannot find workers because they can't pay more than the unemployment rate. That's a problem where you're sitting there and subsidizing people past the market expenses. What I think that or sorry, what the market would pay. I think of what you should be sitting there and realizing is, yes, we had a catastrophic incident with the coronavirus. We were scared as a nation. We really didn't have a lot of information. We saw Italy where thousands of people were dying very quickly, and we had to react. So I don't fault anyone for being scared or for the government for reacting the way that it did, knowing as little as it did. However, that being said, we should have never sat there and paid people so much not to work. Instead, we should have sat there and said, okay, we understand you have a family of 2, 3, 4 children. Here's a check because you physically cannot work because of the government, what the government is doing. Yep. I understand that. But once the corporations start going and start working, then you should absolutely join the workforce again. And I also say that we really need to start questioning a lot of these pharmaceutical companies that are getting billions of dollars from the government to look for a cure. I'm all for that. Obviously, there's a lot of sick people. People are dying in this country. However, if a corporation is going to get $500 million from the U.S. government, then it is a stakeholder in that investment. The first people who should get a free trial of that drug, or when that drug is safe for people to take, should be Americans. You should have to pay back that loan. Not paying back that loan means we are making the costs of production public, but we are making the windfall private. That is not capitalism. That is not free market economics. That is a version of socialism that we've sat there and seemed to say okay from. It's corporatism. And we did that in the Obama presidency and in the Bush presidency and many presidencies before then. Either we believe in the free market and we're going to say, okay, we're going to invest for the better of our people, but guess what? You need to then give back to our people rather than giving to, free samples to people all over the world. We should be first in line if we're going to invest in you. That's a working class issue, for example.
Ryan, I got to ask you here because they're pretending another $3 trillion to $4 trillion in terms of a stimulus plan, and we all know that that's done because we're very close to the election, and the V lettering in the economy is not really a V; it's more like an extended L, and we haven't seen the robust recovery that was anticipated based on many of the things that you spoke of earlier. And the president and others should have listened to Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham out of South Carolina when they told them not to add $600 to unemployment. We would have a better trajectory. Should the next monies that come out of Washington, D.C. be completely, if not 80%, tied directly to infrastructure development from here to Alaska?
Well, I support the UBI, the direct payment for people. I mean, there's a lot of people living on their credit card right now, and I sympathize with them tremendously. Their job was taken from them. They're not choosing not to work. Their job was taken from them. And I'm all for sitting there and trying to help those people out, but not to the extent where we're paying them not to work. So if they have a job available, and I know people in essential services like security work, who they can't keep workers because they're being paid so much money. And I know someone who's a part-time worker who tell me, why would I work full-time? I'm getting more money not working.
Exactly.
And I understand that. I don't think you should do that. What I say to conservatives all the time, and what I even said this to people in Washington very recently, the one problem conservatives have is that, one, we don't speak in tangible thoughts. Mm-hmm. It's very it's very thoughts like, the free market, liberty. Those are words that can mean anything to anybody. That's not a really tangible thing. And secondly, there's no large national vision. And I said this to a congressman recently. If you were in charge, if the Congress was completely made up of people like you, and you got to say anything you wanted, what would America look like in 10 years? Tell me in a way that I can see it, touch it, feel it. If you can't do that to me when we're sitting in a room one-to-one, how are you going to do that with anyone else who is just a voter who doesn't know you? I think that's very important. I think the problem right now with Republicans is this situation, this crisis fell upon us, and there was no national vision of how to rebuild our country. This should have been a moment that really nationalists and populists, and maybe there's just not enough of them in the government yet, should have thrived, where we sat there and said, how do we reform our country to make it more like our vision and use political capital in this time of crisis, rebuilding the Midwest, rebuilding working class neighborhoods and communities all over the country? But I think the most important thing is what we're having now, a conversation on schooling, right? Conservatives have complained for 40 years that schools are teaching children to hate their country. We've said this over and over, and we're right about this. Why are we the first ones screaming, open up the schools? What we should be talking about is how do we take money that is going towards education and get it back to parents so they can choose how to use their resources. There are parts of this country uh, where you teach your kids at home, homeschooling, where homeschooling co-ops are illegal. So if you have a math teacher or a retired math teacher who lives on your block, who could teach all the children whose public school has been closed, in some communities, it's illegal for her to do that. Why are we having that conversation right now? In New York City, where I live and I'm from, we spend $25,000 per pupil. Imagine what a parent could do with 25, or if she has 2 or 3 kids, $50,000 or $75,000. Her kid can get a far superior education, even if she was homeschooling. It would subsidize a working class mother who has to choose between going to work and teaching her 2 or 3 children. That would subsidize her income, possibly for the entire year. This could be a huge opportunity to stop the brainwashing in public school. But
James,
rather than having this dialogue, Ryan James,
forgive me. um, Ryan, I just want to say that you're on a network that's been promoting that very same thing since February of this year, that the money has got to go to the parents and not to the teachers union. It is the only way that you're going to have liberty and freedom taught directly to the children, and that they are not isolated in ignorance and the blissfulness.
And by the way, this is a major issue for this election that no one's talking about. Joe Biden has said that if he becomes president of the United States, he is going to ban for-profit charter schools. There are 250,000 children in the state of Florida alone who are educated. The whole city of New Orleans is basically charter schools at this point. You're talking about underprivileged children, mostly non-white minorities, who are going to be at the absolute brunt of this choice. And it's not to make any kid in this country smarter or better or more well-trained for the jobs of the future. It's to appease the teachers union. And that is truly outrageous. And if I was a parent, I would be furious. I think that this I think this is the time to have the national vision.
I like the idea of the national vision. I hope the president's listening tonight and that he understands that this is that moment that we've all been waiting for. We talked about COVID-19, but I want to discuss with you very quickly the violent unrest that's going on in Seattle, that's going on in Chicago, that's going on in
New York,
in Washington, D.C., where there's 111 murders as of last night. In the District of Columbia, that's going under the radar screen. Is this all legitimate as a result of poverty? Is this legitimate as a result of years of Democrat rule in these urban centers?
Well, in the book, They're Not Listening, How the Elites Created the National Populist Revolution, one of the core principles for national populism on a global scale is that law and order is the cornerstone of prosperity. In order to have prosperity, you need 2 essential things. You need property rights and you need gun rights. You need to be able to produce something and to defend what you produce and what you own. That is essential. I think the problem is right now we have spoken down to certain classes of people, and we said it's okay to act like this when it is not okay to act like this. No one in civilization, in a civilized society, would act like this. It's not okay to sit there and act as barbarism, and to sit there and to have a conversation where we make up stories and fantasies and we sit there and sell them as realities. We have sold this reality that cops are attacking and murdering black men mostly. That is not true. Statistics bear it out. It's just not the case whatsoever. Could we have conversations on policing? Absolutely. Could we have conversations on community policing, gun protection, gun rights? We can have a conversation on all of those things. However, we have to speak in truth and not in fairy tales. When you have an MSNBC host like Ari, whatever his name is, Beshler, or whatever his last name is, going in front of a burning building with rioters and saying it's a peaceful protest, that is a lie. That is a fantasy that he is feeding his audience and saying it's okay to do this. It is not okay to do this. And the communities that they hurt the most are the communities that they are promising to protect. And really, if you look at the corporations that are signing on to this and saying that it's okay to do this, why are they doing that? Because it fulfills their wishes. because as a part of, I mean, look at Amazon alone. Amazon is seeing the destruction of many mom and pop businesses, more brick and mortar businesses across this country who are already dying because of the coronavirus, and now their businesses are being burnt down to the ground. They're
Yes.
absolutely going to win because of this, not any other reason. They're advancing all their social causes in the name of the anti-racism movement. And the anti-racism movement doesn't seem to accomplish any of the goals that they sit there and they start at all. If you really want to have a conversation over many, many things, let's start. Let's talk about single motherhood. It's a major, major cause of crime in many communities of all races. Let's talk about education system. There are hundreds of thousands of kids who just they're not learning in our public schools, and it's okay. I was a kid who couldn't sit still in class. Many boys can't when we're younger. It's just truth, and we should have ways. We should open up and expand our forms of education to fit more needs, not less. And that this one size fits all version. Maybe we need to take some of those boys who are restless in classrooms and put them in programs where they learn skills. Maybe they would advance more in that, becoming car mechanics or becoming a plumber. And I'm not saying that disrespectfully. I'm saying that
No.
that's a good job. That is a job that they could do something in their life that is prosperous, that is going somewhere. But because they don't see a future, and a lot of times don't have parents, they don't have parents, both two parents who help them grow up, they sit there and find, love and acceptance and community and money in horrible and in illegal ways that are harmful both to them and to others. And we have talked down to classes of people and said it's okay, or we have completely brainwashed the children of the elite who are now running around as members of Antifa.
It's really sad that we've gotten to a point in this country when the 1950s and 60s, the vocational trade industry was so dramatically important and prominent in our nation. We've gotten to a point now we have to apologize because we want someone to become a plumber. It's really, really sad in our particular culture.
Right. And that's a good job.
Yes, it's a dang good
It's
job.
a good job.
150,000 a year. Wish I could do it.
Me too.
Listen, very quickly, because I've been telling people since 2 years ago that this election is so vital that it's not enough for us to have a president with conservative viewpoints, that we have to win the House and we have to keep the Senate. Are we going to do that in 2020?
It's tough. I mean, certainly, listen, the media has sat there and attacked Donald Trump, especially on COVID, and there's a lot of people who want him to do a lot of different things, and I feel like the president really has his hands tied in many ways. There's not much he could do. I mean, there's really not a lot that he can do. The media is harping on this, that he should nationalize mandating wearing a mask. There's nowhere in the Constitution that they can legally make that. Obama's former health person, they said that we should freeze all interstate travel. That would end Washington, D.C., because almost no one lives in that city. They live in Maryland or Virginia. In New York City, that would starve us to death. And
Yes.
a lot of other places, Cincinnati, they live in Kentucky. These people are lunatics. He has sat there and he's greenlit a lot of pharmaceutical drugs to do testing, a lot of the governors. It's not an easy situation. I think that rather than looking at the trees and not the forest is sitting there and saying, what kind of country do we live in? If Joe Biden and the Democratic Congress come in 2021, we're going to see the end of the filibuster. We may see a packed Supreme Court where all these judges we put in mean nothing. And more importantly, we're going to get the economics of the past, the economics that gutted middle America and working class America, and the radicalism of the future, of the AOCs, of the Ilhan Omars. That is a very scary future. That's not something that most Americans want. So listening to just fear and fear alone rather than the larger picture of what direction is this nation supposed to be going in? Are we a nation that believes in sovereignty and the will of the people and a voice for working class people? Or do we want to be a nation of corporate elites? That is the presidency Joe Biden has sat there and endorsed, and that is what we will get. And it is a very, very scary future that I think that people need to really be active for. And I know talking about politics is extremely uncomfortable for most people, but you need to have that conversation with a friend and a neighbor and a relative who's on the sidelines and saying, listen, it's really important that you go out and vote. I know you feel like your vote doesn't mean anything, but if there's enough people who are having that conversation, you can change entire states and entire future of our country.
Yeah, and certainly do not allow emotion to be the charging effect, because your emotions are being twisted constantly by
And you know what? One
media.
more thing.
Yes.
I know you have to wrap up, but one more thing. There was a study by a professor, Dr. Robert Epstein, and he studied Google and Google Analytics and Google searches. And the group of people that are the most influenced by Google searches and what comes up on Google News are moderate Republicans. If you don't think that
Really?
Silicon Valley, yes, they're the most easily influenced by social media and Google searches. And if you don't think that there is an interest by big tech to sit there and influence your vote, then you're completely mistaken. There is absolutely an effort. Maybe someone like yourself or myself are not going to be influenced by that, but a moderate Republican who really cares about not being liked, they very well may change their vote. So those are the ones you really need to talk to and make sure that all the chickens come home to roost. There are 4 million people in this country who became first-time gun owners in the last 3 months. There's a serious fear in this country, and it's the time that they made their voices heard, regardless of what the polls have said, because polls have been wrong many times in the past.
Exactly. Ryan Girdusky is with us tonight, ladies and gentlemen, the author of They're Not Listening: How the Elite Created the National Populist Revolution. We thank you so much for being with us tonight. How can people get your book? How can people read your writing, sir?
So the book is on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, Books A Million, wherever books are sold, SimonandSchuster.com. My Twitter handle is at Ryan Girdusky. I write regularly for many different outlets, or you can go to RyanGirdusky.com and read my archive of past articles.
Don't be a stranger, sir. We're going to need you in election 2020. Ladies and
Oh,
gentlemen,
thank you for having me.
make certain that you get that book this weekend. Make certain that, in fact, don't wait for the weekend. Go ahead and get it now. Get the book now. You can do it during the station break. Ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Girdusky with us tonight. Thank you so much for being with us, sir.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this particular interview you will find on BitChute and YouTube tomorrow morning. You know what we got to do. We got to make an insane amount of money. That's how we're able to feed all the bulldogs. These commercials are coming up. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back with more of the best in urban conservative talk. You are watching the Exceptional Conservative Show.